True Detective's Rust Cohle is my all-time favorite character in television history, and if you don't agree,
it'd be a lot cooler if you did.
I know it's become somewhat cliche and memeified, the he's just like me type of meme, but genuinely I've never personally connected with a character more than Russ. Russ' hyper-analytical and naturally philosophical hypersensitive mind, his obsession with the symbolic, esoteric, and the occult, his aversion to stupid people, someone who genuinely doesn't fit into any category. Not to toot my own horn, but I hold a lot of similar parallels in my demeanor and ways of communicating and thinking, so naturally I connect with the character. I see a lot of people describing Rust as a nihilist, and quite honestly, it bothers me. Even Jordan Peterson's interview with Matthew McConaughey, he largely had this take when discussing the show.
He's very nihilistic, the character Cole.
But I think that is a completely wrong take on who Russ truly is. Yes, clearly he engages in the deepest forms of nihilistic philosophy with a sort of pessimistic evolutionary take.
Look, I'd consider myself a realist, all right? But in philosophical terms, I'm what's called a pessimist. I think human consciousness was a tragic misstep in evolution. We became too self-aware.
That side of him, I think, is largely a result of the extreme guilt and pain he feels for the accidental death of his daughter, which he was responsible for. I see his engagement with the most nihilistic and meaningless states of mind and being as a search for meaning itself. Someone who has the courage to explore all philosophical states of mind, even the most empty, nihilistic, and miserable ones.
Also, as a person who is a believer, to have to be inhabit a character who is not a believer at all, and here's why. At the time that I chose and wanted to go inhabit Rust Cohle was the time that my faith was strongest.
What do you got the cross for in your apartment?
It seems to be a contradiction that Rust has a crucifix on the wall of his empty apartment, but it's not. Marty asks him about the crucifix.
I contemplate the moment in the garden, the idea of allowing your own crucifixion.
Clearly, this is partly driven by what happened to him with his daughter and the self-crucifixion of basically his entire life. Man and his child, paralleling God and the Son in a subtle way. But again, a man who has the courage to truly contemplate these states of being, these spiritual symbols on a metaphysical level,
It's a form of meditation.
to empathize and to relate to the crucifixion itself that deeply and honestly is ironically very Christ-like, more so than really any other character in the show.
And if my faith would have been as strong, I might have been a little more fearful of going so deep into this man's mind, spirit, and ethos.
A man who experiences something so terrible in his life, but then stays true to what is truly moral, even uses it as a sort of redemption and healing for the tragedy of his own daughter, in an effort to save other children from true evil.
I could feel, man. I knew my daughter waited for me there.
A superficial viewing of Rust would see him as atheistic in many ways, but I disagree strongly with this. Clearly, he has a distaste for organized religion and churches and puts out entirely valid criticisms of the Southern preacher in his tent, and what he perceives occurring in front of him.
See a propensity for obesity?
His description of religion as a language virus is a fascinating concept that has always stuck with me.
Certain linguistic anthropologists think that religion is a language virus that rewrites pathways in the brain, dulls critical thinking.
Yet Rust in his action and adherence to a strict moral code indicates he does believe in an ultimate good and purpose. He has no need for virtue signaling, which is how Marty seems to engage with his form of religion, in my opinion. Rust, a man who is set on truly fighting evil in the face of literally any circumstance, by its own definition cannot be godless or truly nihilistic, as he is striving for what is moral and true. I ask, who is more connected to quote-unquote God or truth, the fancy-suited wealthy preacher who wears the label of Christian but is part of networks of unspeakable evil, or the man who doesn't care about how people label him and is beyond all peer pressure but is able to see beyond the surface-level appearances due to a strict pursuit of honesty and truth? His morality doesn't come from a worldly place or any man judging him. He truly doesn't give a shit what anyone thinks, but at the same time won't ignore what others say or think.
Just want you to stop saying odd shit.
Okay, just go with me here on this one. I'm going to get way too abstract, but just go with it. In the beginning, there was the Word, right? And the Word was God. That's what comes to my mind when he mentions religion as a language virus. Word before it was corrupted, you could say. When meaning was still intact. The proper use of word or language itself, right? How else can one strive towards truth and what is right without the proper use of word or language itself? In the beginning of meaning, there was word.
The echoes of my life could never contain a single truth about you.
This, he's effective in proportion to the amount of certainty he can project.
And this is why I'm so fascinated with the concept of a language virus, dulling critical thinking, breaking down the ability to even communicate clearly, tearing apart observation itself.
What's scented meat?
If you think this is a contradiction using biblical reference to analyze Rust's seemingly anti-religious atheistic rant, well, Rust himself does this sort of thing constantly throughout the show. So when applying the concept of a language virus to today's world, I think we can see this happening more than ever now with the wokies. They have confused the repetition of rhetoric and phrases for truth itself. It's a distortion of the purpose of language meant to point at meaning rather than being that meaning itself. Mindlessly repeating words is not where meaning actually resides. Someone who signals redundant pronouns in their social media bio does not do so to convey any meaning, but does so as a way of signaling belonging to a particular ideology.
About consistency. Don't tell me that this
As you touch the leaf with its flame.
And this ideology takes hold of them in the same way that a virus does.
is lasers and an entire amount of tropes and also
He's effective in proportion to the amount of certainty he can project.
This is the nature of all cults. They seem to replace meaning itself with the empty worship of symbols whose members require allegiance towards. And in turn, they get a sense of belonging and unquestionable moral authority and virtue. I know this seems like a tangent, and it kind of is, but just so much of the lines and quotes from Rust have just been ingrained into my mind, and I think they're very applicable to what modern society is currently dealing with. So anyways, I think Rust is the most well-written and in-depth, well-developed character on a psychological, philosophical, and spiritual level. And if you don't agree,
It'd be a lot cooler if you did.
anyways, thanks for listening to me ramble about nothing, and please like, share, subscribe, and comment below. Thanks, and bye.
Acting choices with Rust Cohle. I just did what I could to understand the text so well that I could just say it and not have to solicit it.
lasers